The heavy oak door didn't slam. It clicked shut with the precision of a guillotine blade dropping into its cradle. Inside the private parlor of the social club on Mulberry Street, the air was stagnant, recycled through the lungs of 5 men who hadn't exhaled in 40 seconds. The only light came from a street lamp filtering through the blinds, slicing the room into bars of gray and black. At the head of the table sat the capo, a man whose word usually moved armies of soldiers across the boroughs. But tonight his hands were trembling, not much, just enough to make the ice in his whiskey glass chatter against the crystal. He wasn't looking at the men surrounding him for protection. He wasn't looking at the exits. He was staring at the center of the mahogany table. There was no gun. There was no bomb. There was only a small velvet pouch, the kind used to hold a rosary or a wedding ring. It sat there, innocent and terrifying, a black hole absorbing all the bravado in the room. The capo knew he shouldn't open it. He knew that whatever was inside that pouch was going to rewrite the ending of his life. But he had no choice. The silence stretched, tight as a piano wire, until it began to hum in their ears. He reached out. His fingers brushed the velvet. The room went dead still. Even the smoke from the cigars seemed to pause in the air. He loosened the drawstring and tipped the contents into his palm. It wasn't a finger. It wasn't a bullet. It was a simple silver key, a house key. His house key, the one he kept on a chain around his own neck, hidden beneath his silk shirt, the one that was supposed to be resting against his chest right now. His hand flew to his chest. The chain was there. The weight was there. But when he pulled it out, the chain ended in a jagged cut link. The key was gone, taken from his body while he slept. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The man he was planning to go to war with hadn't just breached his territory, he had breached his bedroom. He had stood over him while he dreamed, held his life in his hands, and chose to leave a message instead of a corpse. If you're drawn to the untold power stories of Harlem and the men who ruled without noise, you're already in the right place. This is Bumpy Johnson Files. Subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. The archives of the New York Police Department will tell you that the gang war of 1948 fizzled out because of internal restructuring within the mafia. The newspapers reported that the mob simply lost interest in the uptown numbers racket. They lied. Or rather, they just didn't know. The files on what actually stopped the bloodshed were never written down because the men involved were too terrified to speak them aloud. There were no arrests made, no shots fired, and no treaties signed on paper. The war didn't end because of a truce, it ended because of a ghost. This story changes the fundamental understanding of how control worked in the golden age of organized crime. We are taught that the man with the most soldiers wins. We are taught that violence is the ultimate currency. But the man at the center of this story knew that violence is actually a sign of failure. If you have to shoot, you've already lost the argument. He understood that true power is the ability to induce a nervous breakdown in your enemy without ever raising your voice. This is The Silent Threat, a masterclass in psychological demolition that has been whispered about for decades but never fully reconstructed. Until now. Before the legend was cemented, before he was the undisputed godfather, he was a man walking the razor's edge of annihilation. It was the winter of the Great Freeze, both in the weather and in the underworld. The truce between Harlem and the Italian syndicate was fraying. A new faction of the Genovese family, hungry and reckless, decided that the old agreements didn't apply to them. They wanted it all. They wanted the numbers, the unions, the heroin trade. They didn't want partners. They wanted servants. The pressure on him was suffocating. Every day, reports came in of his runners being jumped, his shopkeepers being shaken down. The streets were scared. The people who looked to him for protection saw the wolves circling, and they saw him doing nothing. His own lieutenants were restless, fingering their triggers, demanding permission to strike back. "Let us hit them," they hissed in the back rooms of the clubs. "Let us show them we bleed red too." He sat alone in those meetings, his face a mask of granite. He felt the fear. It gnawed at his stomach like a rat. He knew the mathematics of war better than anyone. If they went to the mattresses, if they started a shooting war with the 5 families, Harlem would turn into a slaughterhouse. He had fewer men, fewer guns, and no political cover. He would win battles, sure. He was smarter than them. But he would lose the war of attrition. He would watch his friends die, his neighborhood burn. And for what? To be king of the ashes? The moral struggle kept him awake at night. Was it cowardice to hold back? Was it weakness to refuse the bait? He walked the streets at 3 a.m., the collar of his coat turned up against the biting wind, looking at the sleeping brownstones. These people were his responsibility. If he unleashed the dogs of war, their blood would be on his hands. He needed a way to stop a tank with a whisper. He needed to strike at the heart of the enemy. But the heart wasn't on the street. The heart was in the mind. The Italian faction was led by a capo named Sal, a man who believed in the absolute superiority of force. Sal lived in a fortress in New Jersey, surrounded by walls, dogs, and guards. He believed he was untouchable. He believed that the wild man of Harlem could never reach him in his sanctuary. That arrogance was his crack in the armor. The king of Harlem didn't send soldiers to New Jersey. He sent eyes. He sent shadows. For 3 weeks he did nothing but watch. He learned the rhythm of the capo's wife better than the capo knew it himself. He learned the shift changes of the guards. He learned the route of the milkman. He learned that the capo's wife liked to leave the back window of the sunroom cracked open an inch to let the cigar smoke out. Tension mounted in Harlem. A betting parlor on 116th Street was firebombed. 2 clerks were hospitalized. The streets were boiling. His lieutenants were on the verge of mutiny. They confronted him in the office above the pool hall. "They are laughing at us," one of them shouted, slamming a fist on the desk. "They think you're soft. If we don't hit back tonight, we're finished." He looked at them, his eyes dark and heavy with lack of sleep. "Give me 24 hours," he said softly. "If it's not over by tomorrow night, you can burn the city down, but give me tonight." They gave him the time, but grudgingly. They didn't believe in magic. They believed in the heavy caliber of a Thompson submachine gun. They didn't know that the war had already moved to a battlefield they couldn't see. He drove to New Jersey alone. No driver, no backup, just him and the silence of the Lincoln Tunnel. It was a suicide mission by any standard definition. If he were caught near the capo's estate, he wouldn't just be killed, he would be erased. But he drove with the calm of a man who had already accepted his fate. He wasn't going there to fight, He was going there to deliver a ghost story. He parked a mile away and walked through the woods. The snow crunched softly under his boots. He bypassed the front gate. He slipped through the gap in the fence where the ivy had rotted the wood, a gap his scouts had found days earlier. He lay in the freezing mud of the garden for 2 hours, watching the guards pace. He became part of the landscape. He controlled his breathing, lowering his heart rate, becoming cold, becoming nothing. When the guard turned the corner to light a cigarette, he moved. He didn't run, he flowed. Across the lawn, into the shadows of the terrace. The sunroom window was cracked, just as the pattern predicted. He slid it up, soundless as smoke, and stepped into the enemy's sanctuary. The house was quiet. The heavy ticking of a grandfather clock was the heartbeat of the beast. He walked through the halls, his shoes wrapped in cloth to muffle the sound. He wasn't looking for a safe to crack. He wasn't looking for documents. He was looking for the bedroom. He found the door ajar. Inside, the capo lay snoring, a mountain of flesh under a silk duvet. His wife slept beside him. The gun was on the nightstand, within arm's reach. This was the moment. He could have ended the war right there. One pillow over the face, one quick motion with a knife. It would have been easy. But dead men are just martyrs. Dead men invite revenge. He didn't want a martyr. He wanted a believer. He stood by the side of the bed for a long time. He watched the chest of the man who wanted to burn Harlem rise and fall. He looked at the family photos on the dresser. He absorbed the intimacy of the room. Then, very carefully, he reached out. He didn't touch the gun. He reached for the chain around the capo's neck. The capo shifted in his sleep, a grunt, a twitch of the hand. He froze. If the eyes opened now, it was over. The silence in the room screamed. The shadow of death hovered inches from the sleeper's face. But the eyes stayed closed. The breathing returned to a rhythm. With the precision of a surgeon, he used a small pair of wire cutters to snip the link of the chain. He caught the key before it could slide onto the sheets. He held it in his gloved hand. It was warm from the capo's body heat. He didn't leave immediately. He took one more object from his pocket, a single distinct item, a black chess knight. He placed it gently on the nightstand, right next to the gun. The knight, the piece that jumps over walls, the piece that moves in ways straight lines cannot predict. He slipped out the way he came. The exit was harder than the entry, the adrenaline beginning to crash, the cold seizing his muscles. But he made it to the car. He drove back to Harlem as the sun began to bleed gray light over the skyline. He hadn't fired a shot, he hadn't thrown a punch, but he had just dropped a nuclear bomb. The meeting the next night was the one in the parlor, the one with the velvet pouch. The capo stared at the key in his hand. Then he looked up at the man from Harlem. The arrogance was gone from his face, replaced by a pale, hollowed-out look of violation. He wasn't thinking about business anymore. He was thinking about the fact that he had slept through his own execution. He was thinking about his wife, his children, sleeping in a house that was no longer a fortress, but a cage. "You were inside," the capo whispered. "It wasn't a question." "I was," the man from Harlem replied. His voice was low, devoid of triumph. "I stood by your bed. I watched you dream. I could have taken your breath. I took this instead." He pointed to the key. "Why?" the capo asked, his voice cracking. "To show you that there are no walls high enough," he said. to show you that if we go to war, you don't sleep anymore. None of you sleep. You think you have soldiers. I have the wind. I have the night. You can't shoot the dark, Sal." The threat hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. It was the twist that no one saw coming. The twist wasn't violence. It was the demonstration of total, unrestrained access. It was the revelation that the king of Harlem had spared the capo's life as a gift, and a gift can be taken back. The capo looked at his lieutenants. He saw the doubt in their eyes. They realized it too. If this man could walk into the boss's bedroom and take a chain off his neck, what could he do to them? The psychological foundation of their power, their belief in their own invincibility, collapsed in seconds. "What do you want?" the capo asked, closing his fist over the key. "Peace," the man said, "and respect. You stay downtown, I handle uptown. No more bombs, no more beatings. We go back to business." The capo nodded. It was a fast nod, a desperate nod. "Done," he said. "It's done." The man stood up. He didn't shake hands. He simply turned and walked out of the room. He walked out into the night, leaving the Italian crime lords sitting in the wreckage of their own egos. The word didn't spread immediately. It trickled out. The fire bombings stopped that night. The soldiers were recalled from the Harlem borders the next morning. The war that was supposed to tear the city apart simply evaporated. Enemies who heard the story later couldn't believe it. They thought it was a myth. But they noticed the change in the capo. He became paranoid. He tripled his guard. He moved houses. He never slept without a light on again. And he never, ever crossed the man from Harlem. The legend of the key in the night became a cornerstone of the underworld's unwritten constitution. It established a rule that held for decades. You do not hunt the man who can hunt you in your sleep. It changed the dynamic from a contest of strength to a contest of intelligence. It proved that the most dangerous weapon isn't the one you hold in your hand, it's the one you plant in your enemy's mind. The king of Harlem sat in his office that night, the same office where his men had demanded blood 24 hours earlier. He poured 2 fingers of scotch. He didn't drink it immediately. He held it up to the light. He watched the amber liquid swirl. He had won. He had saved his people, and he had done it without creating a single widow. He understood the philosophical truth that would define his reign. Power isn't about how loud you can shout. It's about how quiet you can be while the rest of the world is screaming. It's about patience. It's about the foresight to see that a key is heavier than a gun, and a shadow is more terrifying than an army. Control is not forcing someone to do what you want. It is making them realize they have no other choice. This is Bumpy Johnson Files. Subscribe for the stories history tried to bury.